Hello, 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 hello. Hi, 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 hi. How are you? How are you? How are you? How are you? You're not hearing anything, no audio while I'm playing the audio now. I just figured out what I was doing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Let me pull that back then. Let me pull that back. Let me figure out how to do this. And I will. So tell me, you all hearing music? Still not hearing. Okay, you're hearing me now? Let's see how this works. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me? Yes. Good, 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 good. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Thank you all so much. Um, so we are here. So as soon as you jump in, share the live, share the live, share the live. Please, if everyone who jumps in shares the live, we can get started. I don't plan to be very long today. The aim is not to be very long today at all, at all, at all. Um, Good, good, good. Hearing loud and clear. I have one question. Do specific antibodies that are added in the human body affect non-specific antibodies? Okay, so I would answer that question. So today, what are we doing today? The aim today is to talk about um, emergency authorization, use of vaccines versus non-emergency authorization use of vaccines, or regular use of regular authorization, regular approval for vaccines versus emergency use authorization, right? Regular approval versus emergency use authorization. But before I start that, um, this whole thing with Kyle is crazy. This whole situation with whoever Kyle is, I don't even know who Kyle is. I mean, I think I've seen his face somewhere before. I've seen his face somewhere before. And suddenly he is now the most famous person in Trinidad and Tobago because of what he said about Tobago and what should have been a little joke kind of story. Um, But it tells you something. A hi, Pearl. Hi, 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 everyone who's jumped in. Thank you so much. He's a great spoken word artist. Okay, okay. I think that is where I saw him before. I think that is where I saw him before. Um, I think it was just a failed attempt at humor. It wasn't funny. You know, there are some people who could um, make joke of other people, and it's extremely funny. There are some people who simply can't do it. There are some people who, they don't know enough about the group of people they are trying to make fun of, so it does not come out very well. I mean, I don't know which group he falls into really, but I think that it is sad that in this time, particularly in this time where Tobago is trying to fight for this thing called autonomy, and we are feeling as if no one in Trinidad is listening to us, or we're feeling as if they don't think that we're smart, and they don't think that we have any sense, and they don't think that we could fight for ourselves. When you think about all of those things that's happening right now, his timing was just real bad. And I kind of have to question whether what he said was how he really feels or not, and whether he was unique in how he feels. And I'm kind of getting the impression from the last couple of weeks dealing with this JSC that a couple of others of them feel exactly the same way. And that is why they are taking so long to respond to us. That is why they are ignoring when we say things. That is why what Tobago sends to Trinidad is nowhere close to what Trinidad sent back to Tobago. That is why all of those things Jessica is saying, that it highlighted how taboo some issues are, and it reiterated the mindset of Trinidadians about Tobagonians over the years. Yeah, Kyle, nothing. Somebody saying pure failure. Kyle should go fly a kite, you know. But I agree with Jessica. I agree with Jessica that it really reiterates, because you hear it all the time. You hear it all the time around budget time. Um, why Tobago trying to get so much money? They're just leeching all away. If all you want to go, why all you and go all your way? These are the kinds of comments you hear coming out of Tobago, out of Trinidad about this issue. So it's kind of, it's one of those situations where we have to learn the lessons. We have to learn the lessons from it, and whatever lessons we get out of it, we use it to the best of our ability. We use it to the best of our functioning, and we go from there. We go from there. So today, as I said, we want to talk very, very quickly about the process of getting vaccines or getting medications. I'll talk generally about the process about getting medications approved, and then I'll speak specifically about getting the vaccines approved and what we mean by emergency authorization for the vaccines. Because honestly, again, this goes back to us understanding when people speak what they are saying, even if they're not using the correct words. We need to filter through the noise and understand what they are saying. I think people are genuinely concerned about when we say emergency authorization used for the vaccine, that means the vaccines were not tested and they are not safe. And it's critical for us to be able to answer that question for them. Some of you on the live may actually have those same questions. It's important for us to be able to answer those questions, because they are important questions. They are questions that we all have, and we need to have them answered. We need to have them answered. So I am going to try this again. So first, let us start talking about how our medications approved. How are medications approved? Medications have to be first. Pharmaceutical companies have to go through different stages to get a medication, from being an experiment that they did to allowing the medication to be used for the general public. So that is the normal process that medications have to go through. The first part of it includes the university, the pharmaceutical company, the whatever it is, having to having to create whatever the medication is, having to go through the science, going through the lab, putting the chemicals together to say, well, okay, this is the disease I'm trying to fix, or this is the disease I'm trying to prevent, which is what vaccines do. Let me go in the lab and put these things together That is the first part of it. In many instances, that takes a very, very, very long time. In many instances, that takes a long, 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 long time. Um, with coronavirus, though, it did take a long time. It's just that the world did not know that all of this was happening. And this is because COVID-19 is the first pandemic that we had for a long time, meaning it's the first disease that affected every region and every country of the world. That's what the word pandemic means. It's the first disease in a long, long time that affected all of us. The last one may have actually been HIV 40 years ago. 40 years ago. And the coronavirus is actually a virus that has been around for some time in the form of SARS. We remember SARS some time ago, a couple years ago. We also remember MERS a couple years ago. These are all coronavirus related diseases. So scientists have actually been looking at the coronavirus for some time, for a long time, before COVID-19, before 2019. So when 2019 came and they realized that there was this new version of it, the SARS-CoV-2, this new version of the coronavirus, a lot of the work trying to understand the virus, trying to figure out how it functions, trying to, a lot of that work was already done, was already being done in a lot of labs. That is why they were able to identify what the virus was so relatively quickly. And it's why they were also able to find out very, very quickly the genetic sequencing of the virus and that kind of stuff. So a lot of the work, a lot of the background work that usually takes a long time to do was actually happening. It's just that the whole world did not know, was not paying attention to the fact that a lot of this work was happening behind the scenes. That is why when Dr. Corbett, who is one of the people who were responsible for creating the Moderna vaccine, when she got the genetic material, as in the genetic coding of the virus, if you listen to interviews with her, she talks about going into the lab a Friday evening and by Monday morning, basically spent the whole weekend in the lab, and by Monday morning had the data, had all of the information about what it took to get a vaccine, because they had been working on it for so long in the background. So it's important for us to recognize that when the world discovered COVID-19, meaning the rest of us, the average man on the ground, is only when it started attacking the whole world, when the whole pandemic started happening. But that is not the beginning of the research as it relates to the coronavirus. That is not the beginning of research as it relates to coronavirus. Important to note. It's also important to note that when you have medications, any kind of medications going through, after the pharmaceutical company creates the medication, whatever it is, after they do the science, they do the chemistry, and they put the different things together, it then has to go through what is known as a clinical trial. It has to go through what is known as a clinical trial. Now, I want to try to share my screen, which talks about what a clinical trial. Before I did not hit share audio. That is why audio wasn't hearing the music. Gosh, this is ridiculous. So I want to just show this little video right now, which talks about how clinical trials work, how clinical trials work. I am going to start to play this, and I want you all to type to me whether you are hearing the video or not.
From understanding a disease to treating it with medicines is long, difficult, and expensive. To make sure prescription medicines are safe and effective for the patients who use them, the candidate drug must first go through rigorous research studies in human volunteers called clinical trials. A clinical trial team includes doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals. Clinical research is usually sponsored by
So tell me, are you hearing the video? And are you hearing it double or are you hearing it normal? I want to know before I go on. And I would rewind. So somebody type to me, were you just hearing the video? Were you hearing it okay or were you hearing it double? Tell me. I'm waiting for somebody to type. Type fast. Yes, normal from, it was okay. Okay, good. Very, very good. Just wanted to make sure of that before I continued. Good, so let me pull it back now and play it from the beginning so that everybody hears and everybody understands.
The path from understanding a disease to treating it with medicines is long, difficult, and expensive. To make sure prescription medicines are safe and effective for the patients who use them, the candidate drug must first go through rigorous research studies in human volunteers called clinical trials. A clinical trial team includes doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals. Clinical research is usually sponsored by biopharmaceutical companies, academic medical institutions, government agencies, or nonprofit organizations. At the local level, clinical trials have the ability to generate considerable economic activity in and around the communities where they occur. On average, clinical trials account for nearly 60% of the average $2.6 billion spent on developing a new medicine. Clinical trials are divided into three main phases. In phase 1, researchers test the drug in a small group of people, usually between 20 and 100 healthy adult volunteers, to evaluate its initial safety, tolerability profile, determine a safe dosage range, and identify potential side effects.
So, that first part, it shows that there are several phases of clinical trials. In the first phase, so they usually start from 0, 1, 2, 3. This phase 0 is usually the phase where we were talking about them creating the medication, going in the lab, finding the different chemicals, putting it together. That is the phase 0. That is phase 0. Phase 1 is this first phase where they use a small number of people. It is usually about 20, 30 healthy people. And yes, these are all volunteers who know what they are signing up for. These are all volunteers they've gotten what is known as informed consent. These are all people who know what they are signing up for. As a matter of fact, for you to be a volunteer in a research program, I actually did that while I was in school because they actually pay you to do it. They give you a little stipend. And to become a volunteer in a research study, I had to read. They gave me like a little pamphlet about the drug. I had to read it. Somebody then came and explained everything that I just read. And then after they explained everything I just read, after they explained it, a third person then came and asked me, what do you understand? What is the drug? What is it being used for? What are some of the things that could happen to you? That kind of thing. Why are you here? And all of that is to make sure that the volunteers understand what they are getting into and understand all of the information about the thing before they are part of the trial. So in this first phase of the clinical trial, phase 1, they are looking for safety, tolerability profile, meaning how well do people tolerate what it is. Safety dosage range, meaning how much of it should they be giving you, how much should they be giving you, and potential side effects. Because in those small groups of people, 20 to 30, and of course, they're using only 20 to 30 people, just in case it is something that goes ridiculously crazy and people start getting really, really sick and start dying and stuff like that, they know to stop it. They know to stop it quickly because there's only 20 or 30 people that went through that process. So let me now continue. Let me pull back a little bit and then continue with this.
Safe dosage range and identify potential side effects. In phase 2, the drug is given to volunteer patients, usually between 100 and 500, to see if it's effective, identify an optimal dose, and further evaluate its short-term safety. In phase 3, the drug is given to a larger, more diverse patient population, often involving between 1,000 and 5,000 patients, but sometimes many more thousands, to generate statistically.
Let me go back a little bit. So we went phase 1, phase 2. Let me repeat phase 2 again.
Safe dosage range and identify potential side effects. In phase 2, the drug is given to volunteer patients, usually between 100 and 500, to see if it's effective, identify an optimal dose, and further evaluate its short-term safety.
So just so you know, phase 2, it's given to more patients, usually up to about 100. In some cases, it actually goes to a little bit more than 100, and it's looking at effectiveness, optimal dose, meaning what is the best dose you could possibly get. And by optimal dose, it's what they're talking about. So for example, with the AstraZeneca vaccine, they tell you that you need to take the 2 doses, and to take the 2 doses, you need to take it, the second dose needs to be 8 to 12 weeks after the first dose. They would have discovered information like that, that is the best option during the phase 2 of the clinical trials. And again, this is something that takes months, and you're looking at the effectiveness of it, the optimal dose, and short-term safety. So let me continue playing.
In phase 3, the drug is given to a larger, more diverse patient population, often involving between 1,000 and 5,000 patients, but sometimes many more thousands, to generate statistically significant evidence and confirm its safety and effectiveness. These are the longest.
So, phase 3, it is given to way more people, hundreds, even thousands of people, because we have already gotten data from phase 1, where it was just, 20, 30 people, to make sure that it didn't kill people, make sure it actually working, make sure that, you identify side effects, make sure all of that. It then goes to phase 2, which is more people, 100 to 500 people. Again, looking at the best dosage, looking at to see if it is actually working, making sure that you're looking at side effects again. And then phase 3, again, thousands of people, again, ensuring that it is safe, that it is actually working the way it should, that it is working the way it should, and that you are actually getting the results, that the drug company is getting the results that it expected to get.
Studies and usually take place in multiple sites around the world. Once all the clinical testing is completed, if results indicate that the drug is safe and effective, an application is submitted to the FDA to request approval to market the medicine. Clinical research generally continues even after FDA approval is granted. Post-marketing studies, or phase 4, are frequently conducted on new medicines to learn more about their benefits, potential risks, and optimal use. The drug may also be studied in specific subpopulations, such as children. Clinical trials are central to the work of biopharmaceutical researchers in advancing the science of bringing new medicines to the...
Okay, so I can stop there with that one. So you all understand the difference, that we are talking about different phases of the drug. And remember, when you listen to some of the scientists who were working on the different vaccines, they would tell you that we learned about it January, February, March. They started getting information. They started, we could have identified the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and they started creating what it takes to make vaccines. By the way, it's important to also note that because we have been using vaccines all of these years, all of these decades, when it came to the coronavirus vaccine, it is not like we were starting from scratch. And I think that is also important for people to recognize. We'd been using vaccines for years and years and years and years. All of us, I'm sure all of us who are on this live right now can attest to the fact that either you were given a vaccine because when you were a child, or you have given your children vaccine. You've taken your children to clinic when they're 3 months, 6 months, and so forth as babies, and the immunization shot that they got, those were vaccines that they were getting. So the technology as it relates to vaccines have been around for a long time. So we understand how to get vaccines and how vaccines work. In this case with COVID-19, all we needed to do was to identify specifically a vaccine for this specific disease. But we have been using vaccines for years and years and years. That is why in most countries, you don't have to worry about polio, measles, mumps, whooping cough, yellow fever, those things, because we have been vaccinated against those things years and years and years and years ago. So I want you to understand that. Everything that I just showed in the video is what normally happens for any medication, but that is also what happened as it relates to the vaccine. Now, the thing with, and this is where the differentiation comes in, when a drug company is creating a vaccine, they normally go through that process that was outlined there, normally go through that process. Because we were living with COVID-19, and because COVID-19 was ravishing us the way it was ravishing us, because it was ravishing us, because so many people were dying, and let's be honest, there have been diseases in other countries that were killing people fast, but we suddenly got to the point where first world countries, people were dying in first world countries. And when you're in a first world country and you're dying in first world country, the urgency is way greater. So the fact that there were so many people in Europe and so many people in the US dying, that in itself increased the urgency, because there are other diseases all over, in other third world countries where the urgency isn't there as much. Remember when Ebola was happening? And there was Ebola happening in Western and Central Africa for years and years and years. People dying of Ebola, Western and Central Africa, years. People dying of Ebola. But it was only when the Americans started getting Ebola and when the Europeans started getting Ebola that you suddenly realize that we now know how to treat Ebola quickly. We now know how to think. We actually had a vaccine for Ebola right after. So because because the world was going through this pandemic and so many people were dying from this pandemic, the process for getting approval from the FDA, which is just one of the regulatory bodies. The FDA is the regulatory body in the United States. In the UK, they have the EMA and other regulatory bodies. They have something, there was a ruling a couple of years ago, about a decade ago, where they said, yes, this is the process that you have to go through to get approval from the FDA. But if there is a situation where we have an emergency, where we have people dying, and we have something that we have identified is safe, and can be used for this disease, to prevent people dying, or to it may have been a drug that was created and tested for one disease, but then we realized we could use it for another disease. So it did not get approval initially for that other disease. But as we are going along, we are realizing it is working. The FDA a couple of years ago decided that in addition to its normal approval process, it would also include in these special settings something known as emergency authorization. And with emergency authorization, it means that the whole long process that you normally take. And I would explain the two main differences with emergency authorization versus normal authorization. As long as you've gone through a certain level in terms of phases within the clinical trials, and as long as you have identified, or as long as your data shows a certain level of safety and a certain level of effectiveness, then you can get what is known as emergency authorization use, while instead of waiting to go through the whole long process. So let me explain what those two things are. For phase 3 of the clinical trials, there is usually a requirement that you need to have data on these thousands and thousands. And remember, phase 1 is like 30 people, phase 2, a couple hundred people, phase 3 is thousands and thousands and thousands of people. For phase 3, the normal process includes giving thousands and thousands of people, following those people for up to 6 months for some medications and some diseases, depending on how the medications work and how the diseases. You may actually have to do it for longer, depending on the process, how the disease works and how the medication is supposed to work. But for some of these, for the regular process, you have to show data for at least 6 months in phase 3. But remember, to get to phase 3, you have had to already pass phase 2, proven to the FDA that phase 1, you're fine. You would have also had to pass through phase 2, proving to the FDA that phase 2 is fine before you're even allowed to go to phase 3. So when we have regular approval, phase 3 usually lasts 4, 5, 6 months is how phase 3 lasts. For emergency authorization, though, what they do is for phase 3, they have to show data for at least 2 months, showing that it is working the way we thought, showing that people are not getting adverse events, showing that the side effects that we identified in phase 1 and phase 2 really are the side effects that we expect to get, and we're not getting any really new side effects that we did not know about, showing all of that for 2 months. But remember, the people who were in phase 1 and phase 2, we are still following them. The company still has to assess them. The company still has to ensure that they are fine. So it is not that when you do phase 3, you are starting from scratch, and it's only at least 2 months of data. It is 2 months of data in this very large group of thousands and thousands of people. But you could have only gotten to the large group of thousands and thousands and thousands of people if you had already shown in phase 1 and phase 2 that it was fine. By the way, there are many drugs. There are many drugs where they get stopped after phase 1 or they get stopped after phase 2 because the data is showing that they're just not working or they're not safe or whatever. That happens way more frequently than the drug companies want you to believe. So that's one thing. The length of time that you have to collect data in phase 3, that's one of the differences in emergency authorization. The other difference with emergency authorization is the fact that for normal authorization, The drug companies have to have gone through phase 1, 2, and 3 first, get approval, final, before they can start manufacturing the drugs. Before they can start manufacturing the drugs. So they had to have gone through phase 1, 2, and 3 before they could even start manufacturing the drug, which means that you cannot even start production until after phase 3 is done. With emergency authorization, though, once you've gone through phase 1 and phase 2, the FDA and the other regulatory agencies in the UK and so forth, they allow you to start manufacturing the drugs. And that is what happened with the COVID-19 vaccine. So while they were going through phase 3, the drugs, the vaccines were being mass produced. While they were going through phase 3, the vaccines were being mass produced. By the way, our Minister for Health, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, a couple months ago, you heard them talk about the fact that we had actually spent how many millions of dollars as a country because WHO had this COVAX thing. And what the COVAX thing was, actually all different countries were putting money into the manufacture of the vaccine during that phase so that the drug companies did not have to bear the burden of manufacturing those drugs all on their own. They had countries paying money to help with the manufacture of the drugs. That is why for many, many cases in the United States, for example, you would hear them one day say, the FDA just gave emergency authorization to Pfizer. And by the next day, the Pfizer vaccine was out there for people to use. Or you hear them say, yes, today we just granted emergency authorization for Moderna. And by the next day, the Moderna vaccine was already out there in the public for use. It is because when the companies applied for emergency authorization use, they were then allowed, because their data during phase 1 and phase 2 showed that it was fine, it was efficacious, it was safe. They were then allowed to start manufacturing the drugs so that as soon as they released their data for phase 3, as soon as the FDA reviewed their data for phase 3, as soon as the FDA then said, yes, we saw your data, we see your data, it seems to be fine, they can automatically push the vaccines out because they were already produced and waiting there to be distributed. So those two reasons are basically the two biggest differences between emergency authorization and regular approval for the vaccines. By the way, the AstraZeneca, one of the things, it's important to note, one of the things as it relates to the COVID, to the Food and Drug Administration, is to get authorization from the FDA, you have to have done your studies, phase 1, 2, and 3 in the United States. You have to have done it in the United States. AstraZeneca is a European company. The Sinopharm is a Chinese company. These companies did their clinical trials in Europe and in China, not in the United States. So it was impossible for them to go through that same process at the same time that the United States companies were doing it in the United States. So that is why you would hear Biden, for example, talk about the fact that he can send the AstraZeneca vaccines to other countries because they are not approved in the United States. It's not that they are not approved anyway or that they are not safe. It's just that they did not go through the FDA process of approval at the time. By the way, AstraZeneca is going through the FDA process of getting, and they are going to try to get full approval in the United States, because it does not make sense for them to just try to get emergency authorization approval by the FDA in the United States when the United States already has other vaccines that has the emergency authorization approval. So we would very shortly hear that AstraZeneca has been approved by the FDA, and it had gotten the normal approval because it went through all of those steps again in the United States. That's a requirement for the FDA. So let us not be afraid that the United States is just giving us the unsafe vaccines that they don't want. No, that is not what is happening. It is just to prove the process of approval that is different. By the way the FDA does the emergency authorization in the US is basically the same way how it is done in the UK, in China, and different regions. Trinidad and Tobago does not have any authorization agency. We don't have any agency in Trinidad and Tobago to authorize any new drug. So we have to rely on the data that is provided by all of these companies, by Pfizer, by Moderna, by AstraZeneca, by Johnson and Johnson, by Sinopharm. But instead of us trying to review all of that data on our own, we are relying on the technical expertise of the WHO, because the WHO has the scientists, has the different people working with it who can look at the data put out by Pfizer, the data put out by AstraZeneca, the data put out by whoever. They have the technical capacity within the WHO to do that assessment for us. So what Trinidad and Tobago is doing is basically just relying on the WHO, on their technical capacity, instead of us trying to do it ourselves here. Okay? Let me just play this one other clip, which in essence explains what I just explained. It explained what I just explained, but I think it just does it nicely. Let me make sure that's it. Let's see here. Yes.
We generally think of vaccine development as happening through a life cycle, right? You've heard about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies. Phase 1 studies generally look at the safety of a vaccine. Usually you conduct that with a smaller number of participants, and then you gradually expand the number of people that are incorporated into the trials. And this particular phase 3 trial by Pfizer actually had more than 40,000 participants across several countries. And typically after a phase 3 trial is finished, and remember, a phase 3 trial is not necessarily just a few months, it may take about a couple of years, then the manufacturer takes it to the FDA reviews that it is a new biologic agent, and then they give them a license to be able to distribute that to the public. In this situation, they are not going up asking for a license. They're basically saying, in the middle of us conducting a phase 3 trial, we have enough evidence to show that this is highly effective. And so given the fact that we are faced with a pandemic, a very critical situation, we would like to be able to use this for the public in an emergency situation, thus an emergency use authorization. The phase 3 studies will continue. The participants are actually enrolled in the study for about 2 years, and so those will continue as well. We will continue to get more and more data, but in the meantime, because we realize that we are at a critical juncture in the pandemic, we are going for an emergency use authorization.
So I think she did a pretty decent job of explaining really, really quickly how come we've gotten, and basically repeating what I just said, how we've gotten to this point of getting these vaccines so quickly, so quickly. It's so I hope you all understand. I hope you all understand. It's not like we started from ground zero. It's not like we started from scratch. We've been using vaccines. We've been improving the technology. It's like any other area. I mean, think about any other area in your life, any other area in the world. Automobiles have gotten better because we've improved the technology as relates to automobiles. Um, our washing machines have gotten better because we've been improving the technology as relates to washing machines. Everything we do, our computers, our cell phones have gotten better because we have continually been improving the technology for cell phones and computers. The same thing as relates to medicine. The technologies that we were using to do surgeries and so forth 50 years ago, 100 years ago, we have improved on those technologies. The same thing applies to the vaccines. We have improved on the technologies as it relates to the vaccines. The same thing is happening. The same thing is happening. So it's not like we're starting from scratch. It's not like we're starting from knowing nothing about vaccines. So suddenly, in under a year, having a vaccine for COVID-19. So we need to be very, very careful, very, very cautious, very, very afraid that they are trying to do this. No, the technologies have been improving, and it's actually, I see it as a blessing that we've gotten this fast, that the technology has improved this quickly so that we don't have to wait. Imagine if we really had to wait for 2, 3 years before we get a COVID-19 vaccine, how many people would die in just waiting in that period. We have to be thankful that we came in this period where we don't have to wait that long because the technology is so well, is so improved, is so improved. So let me answer. If you have any other questions, put it up. I have one question. Do specific antibodies that are added in the human body affect non-specific antibodies? So one, antibodies, so you're talking about two things, specific antibodies and non-specific antibodies. Antibodies are the things that our immune system make to fight off diseases. Non-specific antibodies are the general antibodies that are out there that, it's kind of like, it's non-specific, it's out there. Any and everything or most things that comes up, it can attack it, it can go and things. The specific antibodies are the ones that are specific to a particular disease or specific to a particular protein. So for example, when you take the COVID-19 vaccine, the antibodies that you would get would be specific antibodies, because the way the vaccine was designed, the antibodies are specific to a spike protein on the virus. So one, they are not putting any antibodies in our bodies. Our bodies make the antibodies because it can read and respond to the information that is provided in the vaccine. And when our bodies make specific antibodies, those do not affect the non-specific antibodies that our body is making or has already made. So it's not like one set of antibodies will be fighting against another set or anything like that. No, that is not how it works. So, you don't have to be worried about that. Somebody asked me recently about whether you could give blood if you have gotten the vaccine. Yes, you could give blood. The only thing that would prevent you from being able to give blood is if you have another reason why you can't give blood. If you have a low blood count or some other disease that is preventing you from giving blood. You taking the vaccine is not going to stop you from giving blood if that is what you want to do. It's not going to stop you from giving blood if that's what you want to do. So are there any other questions before I jump out? And I kind of feel like, well, I was trying to play earlier. Now I figured out what I did wrong. It's amazing. It's amazing how these things can change. So any other questions? Any other questions before I jump out? So cool. If there are no other questions, then I would like to go out with this song I was trying to play when I started. Tell me if you could hear it now. By the way, you could I'm playing this so that if you want to think of a question by the time you could think of the question while this is playing, and then I could still answer it. This old man from So I'm seeing a question coming up. So let me look at that. What do you think about the Russian vaccine? So the Russians have created vaccines. There's like a Sputnik. I haven't looked specifically at the Russian vaccines to look at its efficacy or anything like that. But again, vaccines are not new technology. Vaccines have been created and used all the time. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, in this Western Hemisphere, I think what has happened to us is that we have gotten used to brand recognition. So we know the Pfizer brand. We know that brand because we are marketed. All of us, for the most part, have American TV. So we see the Pfizer advertisements for other medication. We see the Pfizer advertisement. So we know the Pfizer name. We are familiar with the Pfizer name. So we probably feel more comfortable with Pfizer. But there is nothing wrong because, the Russians have been making medication and vaccines that are not in the American market for obvious reasons. We also have, for example, Cuba is now creating vaccines, and the Cuban vaccines will never make it on the American market. Never make it on the American market. But we all know that Cuba is light years ahead of everywhere else when it comes to medicine, when it comes to those things. So I even though I don't know specifically, like I can't give you specific numbers, efficacy numbers, or anything like that about the Russian vaccines, I don't see any reasons why they would be bad compared to any other vaccine. That's how I think about it. So again, if you have questions, please type them. If you have questions, please type while we listen to Sparrow. Spending holiday in Scarborough. Time up here, want to go. Why, brother, I really don't know. Immigration told the old man, you're now a prohibited immigrant. Listen, sire, the time expire. We would like to know where you really want. He said, oh, them Tobago girl. Tick, tick, tick like a new sponge ball. Them from Mason Hall. Easy at all, pretty as a doll. Me, I love them sweet Tobago girl. So guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for the questions. I hope I was able to answer some of your burning questions. I hope I was able to allay some of your fears. Please share this live with other people. Or somebody else is asking a question. Cool, let me see. Kindly explain the difference between efficacy and effectiveness. Very good question. Efficacy is what so during the clinical trials, remember the clinical trials are usually done in very strict circumstances, where they try to ensure that they are comparing like to like. they try to ensure that they remove what are known as confounding variables, meaning all of the things that could influence the results that are not relating to the question that you are asking. So when drug companies talk about efficacy, that really is how well the vaccine in this case works within the controlled clinical trial setting. So you see them talking about 90%, 95%, all of those things is what that means. It's important to note though that the efficacy can be affected by different things. So for example, some of the drug companies that have very, very high efficacy, when they were doing their clinical trials, it was very early in the pandemic when we did not have a lot of people, where we did not have community spread. So we didn't have a lot of people getting infected and so forth. So you may see like Pfizer, and they would say they had their efficacy rates is like 90 something percent and that kind of stuff. While Sinopharm or AstraZeneca or some of the others, they would say they have their efficacy at 70 something percent or whatever. While because and that is also because they did their clinical trials in a different country, in a different setting, at a different time. So it's kind of hard to really compare the two things. Effectiveness now is what happens when we use the vaccines in real life situations. So now we're giving the vaccines to everybody or everybody who wants them. How many people who've gotten the vaccine still get COVID-19 or were protected against COVID-19? How many people who got the vaccine and got breakthrough infection? Because it's important to note that even though you are vaccinated, some people may get what is known as a breakthrough infection, meaning they still get COVID-19. What the vaccines do though is because it's already created the antibodies to fight against the virus. Those people who have breakthrough COVID-19, breakthrough infection, they tend to not get very sick. And many of them don't even get symptoms. And because they don't have symptoms, because they didn't get very sick, they don't die. So when you look at effectiveness, what we're doing is looking at those people who got the vaccines in real life circumstances, not in a clinical trial, to see how well the vaccines actually work with people who are not in a very strict, rigid clinical trial setting. Right? So that's the difference. So yes, efficacy is important. Efficacy is great. That is how they were able to say, yes, let's approve and let's go. But we are way more important in seeing the continued data to show how effective in real life settings the vaccines are. So let's see, any other questions? Is that it for questions? I can't believe this is a whole hour. That we've been here. Well, that I've been here. Thank you all for keeping at it. So if there are no more questions, thank you. So thanks and have a pleasant night. Same to you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, share this with individuals who may, who need this information. Thank you all so much. Have a blessed day and be safe. Remember, if you're in Trinidad and Tobago, curfew tonight is Friday. Curfew is 7 o'clock. Don't get caught up. Yeah, don't get chained up. Curfew tonight in Trinidad and Tobago is 7 p.m. and it's 7 p.m. for the rest of the weekend. 7 p.m. All right, guys. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if there are other questions, you can message me and I could possibly do a live about those other questions at another time so that we could have our questions answered. All right. Bye.